In late 2025, Martin announced Project 91, an initiative to celebrate the world's most coveted acoustic guitar models, the 91 D-45s they built between 1933 and 1942. Martin's plan is to build the guitars in the order in which they were originally crafted, using the original specs and the same materials for each individual guitar. When we heard about Project 91, we not only knew we wanted in from the start, we also knew exactly which guitar from Project 91 that we wanted, the replica of the third D-45 Martin built, which was also the first 14-fret version of that deluxe model, and the first of only two Martins known that are slightly larger than a standard Dreadnought. All pre-World War II Martin D-45s are rare, but this is a rarity even among that select group. I've been fortunate enough to play and examine the original 1936 D-45 that this guitar was based on. I've played it a couple of times over the years, as it's been in the same hands for over 30 years. And the current owner let Martin display this D-45 in their museum some time ago, which allowed them to document it in exhaustive detail. After playing our new version of this rare guitar, I can say Martin has done an amazing job of capturing the look, the feel, and the tone of the original. The Brazilian rosewood they picked for the back and sides is gorgeous. The Adirondack spruce top has straight vertical grain and even coloring. And the abalone purfling of hand-set individual pieces is impeccable. But why did we focus on this particular example from Project 91? The answer is the 1936 version represents both a turning point in the history of Martin as a company and in the overall development of the most widely copied steel string flat top of all time, the 14-fret Martin Dreadnought. But when Martin built the original in 1936, they were still unsure about any version of the Dreadnought, something that's hard for us to imagine today. Martin had introduced the large wide-waisted shape in 1916 as a special 12-fret model for Ditson's New York music store, part of a guitar line designed for playing Hawaiian slide style. The model was a flop, and Martin only made 30 or so between 1916 and 1930, the year Ditson went out of business. Martin did offer Dreadnoughts starting in 1931 under their own brand, but only 12-fret models, and only available on special order. Since they weren't in the catalog or price list, you had to see and hear a Dreadnought in person to know that you wanted one. Martin changed the body shape and began making 14-fret Dreadnoughts in 1934, but only in style 28 and style 18. The Model 45 was still a custom order, and players were not lining up to buy them. The first two orders had been for 12-fret D-45s, one for Gene Autry in 1933 and one for the child star Jackie Kid Moore in 1934. Both were performers on Chicago's WLS Barn Dance, a live musical variety radio show that was a predecessor to the Grand Ole Opry. Martin didn't make another D-45 until 1936, which was the one that inspired our guitar. So what were they up to in 1935 that kept them from making another D-45? If you know your Martin history, you'll recall that they were making archtops in the 1930s. Martin introduced a handful of smaller archtops in 1931 that sold reasonably well. This inspired them to create the larger F7 and F9 models in 1935 to compete with Gibson and Epiphone, whose archtops like the L5 and the Emperor were the guitars of choice for the popular swing bands of the era. Unfortunately, although well crafted, Martin's big rosewood archtops didn't have the punch needed to drive a big band, and the sales were disappointing. Despite putting these larger archtops front and center in the catalog, and sending trial models to just about any dealer who asked, by mid-1936 it was obvious that archtops were not going to save the day. Although Martin's flat top sales were still okay, the sales of both ukuleles and mandolins, which had been a big source of revenue in the 1920s, continued to slump. In 1936, Martin shifted their focus back to flat top guitars, which brings us to our D-45. Martin built two 14-fret D-45s a few months apart, both shipped to a music store in St. Louis. Unusually, those two had bodies that measured 16 1/4 inches at the lower bow, significantly wider than a standard Dreadnought, and the same width as the F9 archtop introduced the previous year. Was Martin hoping a hybrid pearl-bordered Dreadnought version of the F9 would be a hit? Or did they think that the D-45, which at $200 was twice the price of a D-28, needed some extra sonic oomph? We'll never know, because that information either wasn't written down or wasn't saved. It doesn't show up in Martin's archives. We do know the next 14 fret D-45, made in 1937, had a standard width Dreadnought body, and no other Dreadnoughts in lower styles were made in the larger size either. We suspect Martin realized that offering two slightly different sized Dreadnoughts was just going to create confusion for Martin's workers and their dealers. Still, it seems that Martin missed an opportunity by not continuing to offer the D-45 in this slightly larger size. After spending some time with it and hearing some great pickers try it out, I find that the larger body has a bit more volume and a well-balanced bass to treble. And it doesn't feel much larger, which makes it very comfortable to play. Not long ago, Martin introduced the Super D18 and the Super D28, slightly oversized Dreadnoughts which don't have the exact silhouette of the Project 91 D-45, but do have the same enhanced volume and tone. Martin has always been an innovator when it comes to flat tops. In this case, it seems it took them almost 90 years to figure out what a good thing they'd created back in 1936 that had made the D-45 even more special.